Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Comment. Gabrielle Emanuel, Senior Health and Science Reporter. Welcome back to The Comment.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah. It's always a pleasure to have you, even though today we're talking about something pretty serious because Governor Maura Healey recently declared a state of emergency in the state's family shelter system. The system has hit capacity, and that's leaving a lot of families with inadequate support and resources as they try to get back on their feet. So, Gabriella, I want to start this conversation with some reminders and definitions for folks, right? And I want to start with the state of emergency. What does it mean when a governor declares a state of emergency?
So that's actually a more complicated question than you would think.
Okay.
The law lays out specific scenarios in which a governor can declare a state of emergency, and these are kind of a threat, a public health emergency. But the shelter system being overwhelmed doesn't easily fall into one of these buckets. So the governor can declare a state of emergency, can say something's an emergency at any time. But what she did just last week was more of a declaration than a change in her power. So it was a call to action for both the federal government and the private sector to step up and kind of see what's happening. It is entirely different than the COVID-19 emergency declaration. That expanded then Governor Baker's power. This declaration of emergency does not expand Governor Maura Healey's power. Instead, it is a call to action. It's supposed to lay the groundwork in case there is more needed in the future. She was trying to tell everyone, take note, this is a crisis. Here she is.
We've been expanding and continuing to look for housing and shelter opportunities, expanding shelter at a rapid pace, and it's unsustainable. For this reason, today I am declaring a state of emergency in Massachusetts.
All right. Real quick, Gabriella, you've been following the family shelter system for quite some time. Give us an overview of what that system looks like.
Sure. So the Massachusetts system is totally unique. It goes back to a 1983 law that provides a right to shelter for homeless families, eligible homeless families. Over the past year or so, we've seen a number of factors at play that are kind of together really burdening the system. So one of them that I started reporting on a year ago is an uptick in new arrivals. These are immigrants, families who are fleeing upheaval, political instability in places like Haiti. And some of them have been then going into this state-funded shelter system. And without work permits, it's very hard to leave the shelter system to get on your feet. Other factors include the very high cost of living in Massachusetts, the limited affordable housing, the expiration of some pandemic-era protections. So all of these combined have meant that the shelter system is expanding. Back in late July, we hit a record with the largest number of families in the shelter system. Earlier this week, when I got the numbers from the state, we were at 5,700 families, a little above that. And that represents some 20,000 parents and children. And the cost of this system, taxpayers put a couple $100 million a year into operating the family shelter system.
You mentioned some of the factors that are contributing to this current crisis. How does the country's immigration policy play a role in this?
It's a huge factor. And one of the things I keep hearing is that our state's shelter system wasn't designed to deal with an immigration issue that's a national and international issue. I spoke with John Yazwinski, who runs Father Bill's and Mainstream, which contracts with the state to provide more than 150 shelter units to families in kind of the southern Massachusetts and South Shore area. Here is what he said about this new arrival situation.
I think the biggest concern is, do we have enough temporary housing every day to meet the need of newly arriving families? That's an absolute crisis. So that's something that I think is keeping us all up every night, that this is just bigger than an emergency shelter issue.
As you think about it, it's important to know that we have shelters where kind of each family gets their own private space and then their communal spaces. We've also recently been relying a lot on hotels and motels. Hotels, there are two types you can think about. One is a hotel where there's a service provider. So even though you're in a hotel room, there are caseworkers, there's translation services, transportation, there are services around. And then there are hotels that actually don't have a service provider. So these families will be provided with food and the bare basics, but they don't have all the kind of rehousing support and other support systems in place.
So, Gabrielle, I want to zoom in here and I want to learn more about these families. Have you had a chance to speak to any of them?
Yeah. I've spoken to a good number of families who are working through the system. Everyone I have spoken to has had a long and hard journey to get there. Almost by definition, kind of the other safety nets, other things in their lives have failed in order to end up in the shelter system. Many are eager for some bit of stability, whether that's sending their kids to school consistently or getting a job. Again, work permits is a really big issue that comes up. And then there are kind of the daily concerns you would think about, the food that's provided at the shelter, questions about the quality, and concerns about how to find a grocery store where you can use your food stamps. So a lot of kind of logistical and food and housing questions come up.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back with more from Gabrielle.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we are back. Gabriella, I want to go back to the emergency declaration. Tell me in detail what Governor Healey is asking for. And let's start at the top. What is she looking for from the federal government?
Yes, two things. She wants the federal government to expedite work permits. A lot of these newly arrived families are here, are eager to work, really want to work, and they can't work until they get a work permit. But that has been taking many months, sometimes multiple years, according to Healey. And she's asking the federal government to do it quicker because the state needs workers, and these are people who are willing to work. She's also looking for additional funds to support the shelter system, saying we're not set up for this.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, she's also making an appeal to the private sector and private individuals to step up and take a piece of this crisis and help where they can.
Mm-hmm. You explained earlier that the emergency declaration doesn't grant Governor Healey extra powers like it gave Baker during the COVID-19 emergency, but it lays groundwork for future abilities, right? Explain what that could mean here.
Yes, it is unclear exactly what expanded or changed powers would look like. She said at the announcement that she could do everything within her power to kind of alleviate the pressure on the shelter system. But when I spoke with her office, there weren't immediate concrete changes she could make. And she made it very clear that she, at this point, does not have the right or the will to limit the 1983 right to shelter law. But I think going forward, the hope is that maybe, I've heard from some advocates, they'd like to see procurement processes happen more quickly if you don't need all the competitive bidding pieces to line up or funding to be made more readily available. The governor has tried a whole slew of kind of creative, different approaches to try and deal with the situation. So they have been opening family welcome centers. They've been asking for host families, individuals who have a spare room or spare suite, to open it up and welcome a family in need into their home. They've provided legal services to new arrivals. They've been doing a lot of new approaches kind of on the edges, maybe not directly through the shelter system, but to deal with the same population and some of the issues that are coming up.
I got to admit that when I heard this story, when I saw your story go up, it was kind of like, oh, wow, that's a big deal. But now that I think about it, I guess I didn't really notice that. Talk to me about why this crisis is kind of invisible, I guess, like it doesn't strike me when I'm outside. You know what I mean? Why is that?
Yeah. In Massachusetts, we have kind of two different systems when it comes to homelessness. The individual adults, there's one system, and that population is much more likely to be dealing with mental health issues or substance use disorders. Whereas when we look at family homelessness, that's not necessarily the case, and the state does have this right to shelter provision. It's still at record levels, and actually the number of families in the shelter system is only a fraction of all families experiencing homelessness, because it doesn't count the families that are doubled up or families that don't qualify for the system. But because there are these shelters and a lot of families in hotels and motels, they're not quite as visible. However, there are places you can go where you would notice this crisis. BMC, Boston Medical Center, is no longer letting them stay there. However, other hospitals, Boston Children's comes to mind, do still provide help and support and can let people stay overnight. Mm-hmm. So it's very much happening, and it just depends on where you look.
Got it. For people who might be listening and they want to know what can they do, what are some ways that folks can help during this crisis?
Yes. So Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll spoke directly to this question during the announcement for the state of emergency. Here is what she said.
We need donations of time, helping with meals, tending to occupants' needs, assistance with kids. Folks are living in small spaces. Gift cards for any sort of grocery or pharmacy are always welcome. Most importantly, if you have an extra room or suite in your home, please consider hosting a family. Safe housing and shelter is our most pressing need.
The state has also set up a new website where there is more information about a variety of different ways to help. This is mass.gov/sheltercrisis. And they've set up a new email, which is shelterhelp@mass.gov. And they've said they'd welcome all suggestions and advice and ideas about what to do in this crisis.
Understood. Well, yeah, hopefully they get some help and the state can figure this thing out for real, help some people out. Gabriella, thank you so much for coming through to The Common. As always, it's been a pleasure, even though this is a very serious topic. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That's WBUR Senior Health and Science Reporter, Gabrielle Emanuel. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you like what you're hearing, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts, especially if it's Apple or Spotify. Rate and review us. We would really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much ahead of time. And if you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common, or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.